In this video, we are going to be introduced to pivot tables, which are an amazing way to arrange and summarize data much more efficiently as compared to data analysis formulas. So if we have the problem where it takes us a long time to create an accurate and well-organized table of data analysis, we can use pivot tables to improve this process. So for example, if we needed to sum up the sales per salesperson without using a pivot table, we would first have to go and create a unique column of salesperson. I'm going to use the remove duplicates tool on the data tab, selecting salesperson. Leaving us with all of the unique items, we now still have to perform a sum if, choosing the particular range and choosing the sum range. Now, while you can do it like this, as you can see, it involves several steps and the likelihood for an error is relatively high. However, if we use a pivot table, we can do this much more quickly and efficiently. Now, pivot tables can be daunting to use since they do not look like regular Excel, and the rules of using them are somewhat different. However, it's important to realize that you cannot break a pivot table, and trial and error is the best way to learn about how a pivot table actually works. So as we're going to see in a moment, when we create a pivot table, there are 4 specific fields that we're going to use. 3 of them which relate to arranging the information that we want to see, and the 4th which will summarize certain information. Let's go and create this pivot table and work through all of these different areas. I'm simply going to select any piece of data in my contiguous data set. I can move to the Insert tab and then choose Pivot Table. I could also use the keystroke, simply Alt, N, and V for Pivot Table. The Create Pivot Table dialog box comes up. Here, we have 3 areas. The first is selecting the data that we want in the pivot table. And since we have a contiguous data set, which was a table, it used that range, table 1. We also have the choice of where we would like to put the pivot table. I'm going to select New Worksheet. And then lastly, we have an area which we'll discuss in the future about adding this information to a data model. I'm going to click OK. And we now have this pivot table, which doesn't yet have any information in it, but you would have noticed the pivot table fields list pop out from the right-hand side of the screen. Now, all of the names that you see here in the field list should remind you of our data set. As you can see, these are the exact same names that we see in the column headers of our data table. Now what we can do is take any of these fields down to one of the 4 areas in our pivot table. And as we said, 3 of them relate to how the data will be arranged, and the values field relates to how the data will be summarized. So if we wanted to answer our question like we did a moment ago with SUMIF, which would be sales per salesperson, and if you remember we had salesperson going down the rows, I'm going to click and drag salesperson to the rows. And as you'll notice, what Excel does, it looks into the original data and it looks for all of the unique salespersons. And we get that list over here. Since I want to summarize this by amount, I'm going to drag amount down to the values field. And by default, it will perform a sum of the amount. I'm going to select this and use Ctrl+Shift+4 for currency. So as you can see, we've now recreated the exact answer that we had a moment ago. But the beauty of pivot tables is that we now can manipulate and adjust the way that we've arranged and summarized our information very quickly and easily. So for example, let's say we also wanted to see the split according to the different categories of the sale. We can take category to the columns, and immediately we have an extra level of analysis. And we can even swap these around, showing category in the rows and salesperson across the top. The speed and the accuracy with which a pivot table can perform this analysis is quite amazing. We can also have one field below another field. So for example, here we have the accessories and then each of the salespersons, then bikes and each of the salespersons once again. We can also arrange this information by moving different fields to the filters area. So for example, let's take category to filters. And now we have the total sales for each salesperson, but we are able to go into the filter, which is a global filter of the entire pivot table, and only choose a certain component or select multiple components. So as you can see, we've got the exact same structure of our pivot table, being the salespersons in the rows and the sum of the amounts in the values. However, we are globally filtering the entire pivot table for clothing. So this has just been a quick introduction into what a pivot table is and how we can use it to create an accurate and well-organized table of data much more quickly than if we were using things like the SUMIF or COUNTIF functions. And as we said, the three fields that we can use to arrange our information are either along the rows, the columns, or within a global filter, and the values will be summarized in the values area of the pivot table. And once again, the key to becoming proficient in pivot tables is to explore and to use trial and error to learn about the pivot table mechanics. We'll see you in the next video.